Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carol Rosin Show on March 30th. This is a timeless and yet time-sensitive show. We're bringing Dr. Stephen Greer back in. We did another show with him on disinformation that was excellent on March 15th. I hope all of you will tune back into. This one today is on something that's become a worldwide phenomenon. It's just about a cover-up, the Stanford Atacama cover-up. Why Stanford University report is wrong. We'll call Atacama ATA for short. Was there academic corruption in this? What you can do about it? And it's about the intelligence community, corruption of academia, a very worrisome history. Dr. Greer, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be back on. I know it's really short notice, and happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. And I want to also welcome onto the show the listeners that I know are coming in, ministers of President Putin, one of whom is my very good friend, the president of the Academy of Geopolitical Problems, General Avishov, and also he's the doctor of historical sciences. This will be very relevant to these people, this particular information. The president and professor of the Academy of Geopolitical Problems, the president of the Association of the Ecology of the Unknown, which I now hold a position in Moscow. I'll tell people about it in a future show because you have so much to share today that I don't want to take the time. But I also want to welcome listener Dr. Timur Butulov. He's also president of the group of companies known as Conti. And we have many members and many associates of the Academies of Natural Sciences that Dr. Timur is associated with, and people around the world listening in who are very concerned about not only geopolitical problems, but the natural sciences, all the sciences. Dr. Greer has been the champion of the Disclosure Project issue. Many of you know I was a witness in the Disclosure Project in May 2001, but he has also produced amazing videos, books, documentaries. He'll tell you all about this. And in relation to something that he would like to reveal today that is so relevant, you know that I have been putting steps together to support the work that I've been doing, especially in this most recent trip that was so amazing in Moscow, to support the Treaty on the Prevention of the Placement of Weapons in Outer Space. Each of the shows that are archived on AmericanFreedomRadio.com add up to a full picture. And this is one of the culmination points that's such a good example of cover-up, of what the directions are that we can go into and what each of us can do. So again, welcome, Dr. Greer. We'd like for this to be your show and to really go on with everything that you can possibly squeeze into this short period of time.
Yes, well, it's going to be a full show, and I think I want to give an overview of what we're going to be covering. Many of you may have seen the documentary series that featured this little creature who was found in the Atacama Desert of Chile in 2003 and by a treasure hunter. And this was then subsequently taken to Spain with no knowledge of ours. We were not involved in that. It's become a big controversy that it was taken out of Chile as an antiquity. It is estimated to have lived around 100 to 130 years ago in this remote, dry desert area that has a very harsh environment. It's very hot during the day, extremely cold at night in the winters, called the Atacama Desert. And when I first saw it was in 2009. I was in near Barcelona doing a presentation to about 2,000 people, and someone came up to me and said, there's a man here who very much needs to speak to you. And I was shown a photograph of this being. I immediately knew that it was something unusual. And we met, I investigated it, I held it personally. It fits in my hand, it's 6 inches long. So I have big hands, nevertheless, it fit in the palm of my hand. And I was frankly rather astonished. Being a medical doctor, I'm an emergency and trauma doctor. I've seen virtually every kind of human, and I've delivered a couple of hundred infants. And to see something this small that was so perfect and yet did not look human certainly got my curiosity going. But we really weren't given access to it medically until about 2012. And in September 2012, I'm the principal investigator on this project who went over there, and with some assistance, we got some CAT scans, X-rays, which we will also show you. Well, we can't show we can't show those here, but we have them on our website at seriousdisclosure.com. So if you want to see those, you just go to seriousdisclosure.com and look under the evidence part, and you'll see there's a whole section of the CAT scans and X-rays and photographs of this little being. So you can look at those as we're speaking today. What happened is that we wanted to get some studies on the DNA. So we clipped the anterior right lateral ribs, which, by the way, this little being has 10 ribs instead of 12, which is unusual. It has 4 skull bones instead of 6 like humans have. All kinds of anomalies with the skeletal structure. Just so you know, it also has some fascia or connective tissue that had dried out. It was very desiccated. And it had dried out, but you could still see where there was some connective tissue, a cartilaginous type material. In the skull, we were able to extract some of the meninges, the lining of the brain, and what have you. There's no question it's an actual organism that had lived out in the desert at some point. And we simply didn't know what it was. Now, for the record, because it's been misrepresented in the New York Times in the last week, on March 22nd, this fraudulent report came out, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's been misrepresented that we were calling it an alien. If you go through everything that's in the Sirius documentary and everything that I have ever written and said, and we have a YouTube video presentation on this that's had 1 million views already, I never called it an alien or an ET. I said it's unusual and we do not know what it is, and we need to have it investigated independently and thoroughly. Well, around this time, a man named Gary Nolan, who is the Harris Chair professor at Stanford University with a PhD, and his focus is immunology and genetics and what have you. And he has dozens of postdocs who work under him. I've been in his lab, reached out, and he had informed me that he had had an ET contact experience personally, that Dr. Nolan had had contact with ETs, and that he was very interested in the subject, and that he would be happy to be sort of an honest broker to do the genetic work on it. Many people in the last week have said, how did you get mixed up with Stanford, which has SRI and all these other entities that are connected to covert government contracting? Didn't you know that they would submarine this? I said, well, I trusted Gary Nolan to do a good job because I felt he was sincere and he had the credentials, and he also had the equipment that's very, very specialized to do the genetic studies on this specimen, which we knew was quite unusual. Well, during this time period, but we of course, under forensic sterile field, for example, like you would in the emergency department in a rape kit or a murder case or a stabbing or a shooting, we took the evidence and did it under forensic chain of command. It never lost came out from our control and possession until it was handed off to Dr. Nolan. And Gary took it then into his lab to do the genetic research. He immediately was very excited about what he found. He found that there was almost 10% of the genetic material not matching to humans. Now, people go, well, what does that mean? A monkey, if you go to your zoo and go look at what a chimpanzee looks like, or a gorilla, they are 98 to 98.5% identical to humans. So this becomes a very strange now, because that is a very low percentage of matching. Because I don't know the specifics, but a fruit fly has a large number of their genes the same as humans, et cetera, and so on. A guinea pig has a very large number of genes the same as humans. So for it to be less matching, even if it was 98% matching to a human, this would be very, very unusual. And so he said, well, this is something very anomalous. And he had shared this information with a man who has asked to remain anonymous at this time because of the academic scandal that this has become. Now, let me be very clear. The man that I am referring to, I have checked his bona fides. He is one of the top geneticists in the world. He was asked to actually work with Watson and Crick, who discovered the DNA molecule, at Cold Spring Harbor in Long Island. And at one point, his own PhD supervisors were Nobel Prize winners. He has a PhD in genetics from Caltech and literally invented the crystallography of DNA and has done pioneering research for decades and is a man of enormous stature in the DNA field. He contacted me this past Sunday morning and said, this is an academic scandal of the first order of magnitude. And just to give you an idea of how far off the paper, which is in this journal, Genome Research. Now, this is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. This paper appeared March 22nd. Now, that is a peer-reviewed journal. Now, what that means in America is that it's supposed to have gone through the review of people competent to examine the data and also to reach any conclusions so that it could be accepted or not accepted. When I spoke to this world-renowned geneticist, he said, first thing out of his mouth was, any peer review of this paper that Nolan had done would have received a 0 ranking, 0 grade, because he did no controls. He did no proper analysis, and it slipped through and got put in this prestigious journal. And now it's been front page news on the New York Times and CNN and BBC and every journal in the world, claiming that this is a deformed human girl that was an aborted fetus, and that it had 7 sudden magical genes never known before that caused the deformity. Now, one of the things he wrote, and this we just received in the last hour from this world-renowned geneticist, and I want to read this. Nolan says that the Chilean mummy has lots of random chance mutations, which affected 7 different genes for bone development all at once. If such mutations were really random, as he says, then practically every other gene of similar DNA length would have been mutated, meaning at least 1/4 to 1/2 of the 30,000 genes in the human genome. Quite obviously, if this were the case, then the fertilized embryo would never have been able to divide even once. Even an inherited single gene disorder, one gene mutated out of 30,000 can cause serious developmental problems. Now, this is dispositive. This statement by itself pretty much shows the complete incompetence and error of this report that has now gone all over the world saying the case is closed on this. Now, I think that this should be of great concern, even if you're not interested in the UFO and ET issue. The corruption of scientific research and the creation, of junk, the creation of junk science which has begun to come out through more and more of these peer-reviewed journals, has become an epidemic. We have a paper talking about this from the New Republic, where it was an overview where it said that 14 of the 14 most important referenced medical papers in recent times were never made their way into peer-reviewed journals and were rejected, while there were all these others that were getting in that were junk science. So there's something very seriously wrong in general. But in this case, the system broke down completely at Cold Spring Harbor, the birthplace of Watson and Crick, where the DNA molecule was first discovered, and for which, of course, they got the Nobel Prize, and their flagship journal, Genome Research. So this should be of concern to any scientist listening, and any layperson listening needs to be very worried about this. What does this mean in terms of the veracity of what we consider truth coming out of academia and scientific research? Now, somewhere in that period between October of 2012 and 2013, Nolan did before he'd even done all the research, did a 180-degree turn. And by the time the serious film came out, was said to the public that it was a deformed human, that even before he had run all the studies, he had reached his conclusion. And this, of course, caused the entire release of the film Sirius to be not covered in the mainstream media. We had interviews lined up for The View, for Fox News and others, and his statement alone pretty much terminated the release of that film Sirius, which was part of the Disclosure Project effort. And I wondered what in the world is going on here. I knew something terrible had happened. We'll get to this in a moment. So it's also important for people to understand that at the same time that we were researching this, we were getting the clinical data in. Now, what I mean by clinical data is Dr. Ralph Lockman, who is a professor at Stanford, was asked to do the research on this as a medical doctor who's taking care of many of the syndromes we're talking about. And Dr. Lockman's report, which is also on the website, I'm not seeming to be able to find it here where I thought it might be, but his report very clearly stated that this was a 6 to 8 year old child. Now, what does that mean? It means a 6 to 8 year old child that's 6 inches tall. Let me repeat this. And had been up walking around. Anthropologists in Europe, where there was some remaining tissue on the foot and heel, had said that this was also some sort of creature that had been up and walking around. Then we find in this report from Gary Nolan that they're saying that it was a fetus that was aborted that never touched the earth and was never up and around. So the report in the journal shows that this is, and I want to show an x-ray of a picture of me holding up this creature. That's me holding up, and you can see the density of the bones. It's so tiny that the whole being can be in what would normally be just a small view of one bone. And he also noted that all the different abnormalities, the fact that it had 4 skull bones instead of 6, the fact that it had only 10 ribs instead of 12, and yet it was a perfectly symmetrical being. It was not deformed. It was not like you would, if you go and Google, dysplasias of the bone and deformations of the bone, it was perfectly symmetrical. And so what we began to realize is that this was a global situation. Global meaning the entire being was different from a human. And in his report, which I have here, and you can see his signature. I don't know if you can see all of it. And I don't expect you to be able to read it. But what he says very clearly, it has 10 ribs, it's 6 to 8 years of age, and that it is, a genuine specimen. In other words, this is not a hoax or a model or something like that. So now this begins to be more and more worrisome. The information began to pour in clinically from around the world about other creatures like this. And I shared with Nolan that there was one found in Russia. This is why I wanted to do this on your show. And the Russian creature was, look at the back of the head of this one, was 1996. And it looked very much the same in terms of its skeletal structure. Here's one that shows the top of the head almost like a helmet-like structure that you can see. And even to the point that one part overlaps another and comes to a little twist or a point. And this was noted to be so similar to the Atacama humanoid that we got the genetics on. Now, the story behind this one was not only given to Gary Nolan, one of his PhD or postdoc students found all the evidence on the internet for it and remarked about how much it looked the same. And we have that correspondence from Dr. Nolan to them. So one of the things you need to understand about this, it says that the Russian one was eventually taken by the FSB. We need help in Russia relocating this, which had been the KGB. But prior to that, it was found, had 3 genetic studies that were done that showed that it did not have human genetics. However, it was later done by a state lab that declared it was a female human fetus. The same cover story as you see in the Gary Nolan report that's in Human Genome. It's very curious. When I read this the other day, I thought, how strange that it started out the same way and it ended up the same way. It started out that people were doing real research on the Russian creature, and ended up being just an ordinary human that had all these deformities. Now, the story behind that is that it's an area of Russia where there are a lot of UFOs seen going in and out of the mountains. And that area is noted to be a hot spot and has been for centuries of UFOs. Interestingly, where the Atacama humanoid was found, I just got this photograph from the Atacama Desert, is also an area that's noted. I don't know if you can see the photograph or not. Can you see it, Carol?
Yes, we can see it pretty well. And of course,
Okay.
you'll have links to it, but it's quite amazing.
Yeah, and this is a daytime disc classic over the Atacama Desert. And so the native peoples of that area, of both Russia and Chile, now these are separate continents, separate hemispheres, have seen these UFOs and have seen these small creatures, which apparently are just a little over a foot tall when they're fully developed. The specimen that we call the Atacama one, was apparently only a child of 6 to 8 years, or the equivalent in human years of 6 to 8 years. Look again at the skull and the overlapping bone of the one in Russia. And then you go back and you look at the skull structure, if you're on our website, of the one that we have from the Atacama Desert. There's a remarkable, and they both have 4 skull bones. whereas humans have 6. Now, Dr. Nolan had stated emphatically, if there were 2 of these anywhere in the world, it would rule out a spontaneous mutation of a human fetus. There's no way that you're going to have 2 of these that are 1 in a quadrillion chance. And yet he was given all of this clinical data and still came up with a genetic report that has been accepted by this peer-reviewed journal that says the case is closed. It's a deformed human Chilean girl that was a fetus. Well, this geneticist who has been doing this work with us has, and his remarks are somewhere, I will get them in a minute. The geneticist has stated that and I just want to emphasize some of these points that he made. When he first contacted us, he says, first of all, Nolan's story has changed completely since we first discussed the early results. Then he was ecstatic that he had made one of the big history-making discoveries. And despite his strong interest on that day, after that, we never heard from him again. And he goes on to say, if this were my data, and I did the same analysis, my first conclusion after seeing so many mutations with coding regions, including lots of mutations never before seen in any medical database, this is critical, would be to think most of all that such mutations took place after the mummy died. In other words, they are not mutations, they're damage to the DNA due to the 100 to 500 years of environmental exposure, which is unavoidable. I would venture to say that the vast majority of molecular biologists would consider that as a primary hypothesis. Now, what Nolan and his colleagues did next was quite surprising, to say the least. They chose to interpret all of those many extensive mutations within DNA coding regions as genetically significant to the mummy while it was still alive. If it were a fresh, modern, undamaged sample, this might be reasonable. However, for a sample which has been moderately damaged to the extent described, it is not a plausible hypothesis. Now, what he is saying in this, I'll translate this for you, is that we have a paper from 2005 or 2006 that was published in a peer-reviewed journal about what's called ancient DNA. And just so you know, ancient DNA does not mean a mummy from Egypt from 5,000 years ago. And this is the paper. We have tweeted this out because this is an emergency of the first order of magnitude of scientific problem. And if you look at it, the date, what does the date say? 2005 was when the research was done. It was released in 2006 and published. Now, in this paper, it's very technical. It goes into the fact that when you have, and I'll just explain this for the lay person, the persons who are not scientists. If something goes out in your yard and dies, and it sits there for 100, 130, 200 years, the DNA material will still be in the bones, which is where we got this material from, the bone marrow of the ribs. But because of the fact that it's not in a cryogenic lab like you do keep a human embryo when you're preserving them in a cryogenic setting, the material breaks down and the molecule of the DNA breaks down. And if you look up the cytosine and the different aspects of the DNA molecule, they begin to switch and fall off because it gets oxidated. Now, oxidation is a process where it's exposed to the environment and living tissue begins to just get corrupted and breaks down. Now, this is well-established science that when you're dealing with old DNA, you cannot take that old DNA and take those changes that are really the degradation of the DNA and say that's a mutation that caused a physical change in the organism. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not wanting to get too technical here because I know we're talking not to a scientific public, but a general public. But just imagine that something's been laying around for over 100 years with the environment decaying it, and then a group of scientists at Stanford and UCSF take it and say, voila, we have found 7 never before seen combined bone syndromes that resulted in this unusual creature that looks nothing like a human being. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And it gets more complicated than that, but I don't want to bore you. They basically took over 1 million places where there were these changes from the degradation, picked 60 some of them, and had on places that would explain bone deformity and claim that those were new, never before seen syndromes. Now, this leap of conclusion that's in the article, which went worldwide with the help of the intelligence community, I'm going to get to this in a moment, so that it was on the front pages everywhere, completely submarined the idea that this could be an unusual new species or specimen, notwithstanding the fact that Nolan and his colleagues knew about the Russian one, notwithstanding the fact that Dr. Nolan himself told me that he knew that DNA that had been degraded out in the environment would have problems in terms of reaching these conclusions. And in one email, he says he would not reach those conclusions. In fact, in an email dated on December 30th of 2013, in this email, he states that the chances these genes would come up by chance, meaning a mutation, are infinitesimal. Infinitesimal. I'm quoting. Well, what happened? Well, the next thing we know, he is not at all talking. He cuts off communication with us, and I'm the principal investigator who supplied him this sample and spent tens of thousands of dollars to take a whole research team over to Barcelona to get the CAT scans, the x-rays, the sample, et cetera, and so on. And he ends up joining up with this group, this To the Stars Academy group with Tom DeLong. We'll get to this in a minute. And they facilitate the global fake disclosure that this is suddenly couldn't possibly ET related, that the case is closed, it's a deformed human fetus. Here's the problem with all of this, is that the research paper he put out is so dense, and unless you have a PhD in genetics, you're not going to understand it. That's the first thing. Secondly, it appeared and got through the peer review of genome research. Everyone listening needs to contact Dr. Sussman, Sussman, and she is the editor of genome research, and point out that this paper, according to the top geneticists in the world, should have never made it through peer review, period, full stop. It would have gotten a 0 rating, is what he has stated. Number 3, that they cherry picked. It's sort of like Dick Cheney cherry picking the intelligence to put Colin Powell in front of the UN to say, see, he has weapons of mass destruction. Let's go in there and have a $2 trillion war that kills hundreds of thousands of people. This is the scientific equivalent of what Dick Cheney did in terms of data, but because of people's respect for that journal and the fact that the corruption between the media and the intelligence community facilitated this obscure report on this obscure case being headline front page news worldwide, the whole world thinks the case is closed. When, my friends, the case isn't even begun, because there's another case that has to be done. We are calling for a full investigation of Stanford, UCSF, Cold Spring Harbor, and Genome Research Magazine, the process of how this made it through peer review when this top global scientist has said absolutely it should never have been published, and also how was the data manipulated. Now, last night I received another report where he said that in talking to 10 different molecular biologists and geneticists, not a single one thought the paper had any credibility. Now, I'm a medical doctor. I am not a PhD geneticist. So I am relying on these other experts, but these other experts are saying this is completely without merit. Now, how does something without merit make its way into one of the most, if not the most, prestigious genetics research magazine on earth? How does that then become front page news on the New York Times and CNN? I think we need a full investigation for the possibility, now we can't prove this, of some kind of deliberate act of corruption. And if the process in academia on this has been corrupted, we are in very big trouble on this planet, because what that means is that the tricks that were being done in the 50s and 60s, which we'll get to in a moment, where the CIA, and we can prove this because we have documents under FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, where the CIA deliberately has gone in to academic institutions, put people under some duress for some reason, and forced them to say and do things to change the scientific opinion. Let me give you one very famous example. Probably everyone listening knows about Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the kind of window dressing research end of the Air Force in the United States looking into UFOs. The real action was going on in unacknowledged special access projects, which we expose in this book. If you haven't read this book, you must get it. We are actually, because of this emergency that's happened, we're putting this available for anyone to get it half off on our website at seriousdisclosure.com. And if you get the DVD that goes with this, you can get this for free. So you need to go and get it and read it and study it. We don't have time to go through all of that here today. We have so much material to cover. But in 1969, the Air Force pretended to have an objective study of UFOs done, where it was predetermined that the UFOs were not real. And the head of the committee was a Professor Condon at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He was a renowned scientific figure. He assembled a lot of other very renowned scientific figures but he made one mistake. He got one honest scientist on his team named Dr. Robert Woods. Let me tell you what happened, and this is in the disclosure material, and you must read this. Dr. Woods was a senior research aerospace scientist at McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, which became part of Boeing a few years ago. But at that time, and he worked with and knew old man McDonald personally. Mr. McDonald and he worked together, so he was on this Condon committee. And the Condon committee, when he started bringing hard evidence of the facts and the truth, the Professor Condon personally went to the head of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, Mr. McDonald, to get Dr. Woods fired and get him not only all thrown off the committee, Condon committee, but fired from McDonnell Douglas, because Dr. Woods had such integrity. He was saying, no, these are legitimate cases. Here are actual photographs. Here are actual videos. Here's actually places where these have landed. Here are government documents. And he was doing what I was, this is sort of 50 years ago, of course. And luckily, the old man McDonald was quite fond of Dr. Woods and said, no, I'm not going to fire you. And he kept him on. But Dr. Woods was thrown off the committee. The next thing you know, this fake committee, headed up by Dr. Woods, issues a report saying the UFOs aren't real. There's no reason for the government to study it. Let's close Project Blue Book. And they used that report to close any government official publicly overseen investigation of UFOs. What I'm telling you is fact. After I personally briefed the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, I put in a FOIA request and I got documents about the Condon Committee. And in these CIA documents, it explicitly says that Dr. Condon was working for them, was an asset of the CIA, and that this had to be kept away from the public knowledge, because if it was known, it would create a public scandal. Now, what I am sharing with you here is not in debate. This is proven through FOIA requests. These are official government documents, not ones that have a questionable provenance or did someone forge them. These were officially released. I have them in my archive. The question becomes, and I'm reasoning this is a question, we can't prove this yet. Is this what we're witnessing, Carol, in front of our very eyes this past week or two? That we have another situation of unbelievable government and collusion and corruption with academia, resulting in what has happened to this poor Atacama skeleton.
Dr. Greer, I just want to mention this is what you have brought attention to that ties in with what I've been focusing on too, the U.S. Space Command now. The whole purpose of this secrecy, as you call it, the hoax, as Von Braun called it, the last card, is about, and it says it in Vision 2020, this is another document that you have, the space dimension of military operations is actually being designed to, quote, protect U.S. interests and investment, integrating space forces, and now we're hearing space forces, the Space Command being turned into space forces, into, quote, war-fighting capabilities across the full spectrum of conflict. And that's what you're leading this into.
Yes, and then here, and this is where I'm going to connect the dots over the course of this 2-hour show. I'm trying to be methodical in what I'm presenting here. There is something very strange that happened, and at a certain point, we got an email from the director of, and this was actually on the blog of the director of Sirius, and I'm going from Kalika, and he says Gary Nolan, Dr. Nolan, was visited by agents from some form. This is not me saying this is Kalika, from some form of federal level. He told me on the record, on a phone call, which federal investigators most likely now have in their possession. Afterwards, he reversed his findings. Now he's working directly with former CIA and NASA experts in the UFO field on a multi-million-dollar project. Now, this was posted March 23rd, 2018, the day after this journal report appeared.
And the anniversary of the introduction of the Strategic Defense Initiative Space-Based Weapons Program, March 23rd.
Correct. Now I want to connect another dot. And I'm bringing this up. I'm wanting to be careful here for legal reasons. I have a very trusted member of my team who has been with me for a couple years, who also works with senior military officials in India, and up to and including the president, the prime minister. He had a meeting with Tristan Harris. Tristan Harris is who I have also met with. Tristan Harris is the Harris chair. He's the head of that trust that endows Dr. Nolan's chair at Stanford University. And Tristan Harris, in his conversations with my colleague, stated that the reason they had to change the story on this was that there was too much pressure, that it was too explosive, that they were afraid. And what my associate said is that it was quite clear there had been some sort of threat or inducement to cause them to not want to say what this skeleton, which anyone who wants to go on our website and look at it, who is a doctor or even a layperson, will conclude certainly is not a human, will say. And apparently this was of such great concern. This contact flew all the way from San Francisco after his meeting with Tristan Harris, whose trust is endowing the Harris chair that Dr. Nolan occupies at Stanford, and comes back to meet with me in Washington to say something's very wrong here. And now this was about a year ago or so before this report came out. The next thing I know, which is very concerning to me, I get something from John Rappaport. And John Rappaport is an investigative reporter who was drilling down on this strange little group known as the To the Stars Academy. There's an aging rock star named Tom DeLonge who sort of headed it up, but he has apparently become someone manipulated by many of these people in the intelligence community. And this report goes through who these folks are. Now, let me just give you, and now we've learned that this Dr. Nolan, Gary Nolan at Stanford, is a member of this team. One of them is a guy named Luis Elizondo. He was the Pentagon chief of a secret program from 2007 to 2012 to study and explore UFO activity. Of course, it was all couched as a threat, and it was funded in part by the Pentagon, our tax dollars. It was $22 million that then went to Bigelow Aerospace, some of it. And this particular person, Elizondo, we did a research on him. Senator John Warner, who has been a member of the cabal keeping this secret, he's now retired, and he's 90 years old. His son told me that one of his closest friends, who just retired from the Office of Naval Intelligence, stated that Elizondo was the master counterintelligence disinformation person he had ever seen at the Pentagon. And he is the person in the center of this To the Stars Academy group. Just giving you the facts. So I think what we need to do is stick with the facts here. Now there's another man, Jim Semivan. He's from the CIA Directorate of Operations for 25 years. Dr. Hal Puthoff has been working with the National Security Agency, General Electric, Sperry, Stanford University, interestingly, and SRI International, and regularly advises NASA and the Department of Defense and the intelligence communities. Chris Mellon, he served 20 years in the federal government, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and interestingly is a descendant of Paul Mellon, who along with Allen Dulles founded the CIA. More about this later. Norm Kahn, who has a 30-year history with the CIA. And then you get down to the second page of his report, Dr. Gary Nolan, of the Ratchford and Carlotta A. Harris Professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the School of Medicine at Stanford. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Very worrisome, because you know them by the company they keep. And what I'm saying here is there is this, at the time that we handed off this precious, one of a kind, we'll never get a sample like this again, of the bone marrow of this skeleton, the Atacama Humanoid, to Dr. Nolan. He was enthusiastic. He reported to this top geneticist that there were amazing findings, that 90% of the DNA didn't match to humans, which is much, much less than a chimpanzee or a gorilla. And the next thing you know, he's on this advisory group chock full of counterintelligence spooks, CIA people, Pentagon people, and then all of a sudden, after 5.5 years of a delay, this report goes into the world's most prestigious genetics journal and gets headline news all over the place, saying, case closed, there's nothing to this. This smells like the Condon Committee. It feels like the Robertson panel. Now, what was the Robertson panel? A little bit of history. In the 50s, we have documents, a whole sheaf of documents from the FOIA requests from the CIA that we did, that described the Robertson panel being a 1950s iteration of this process, where they talked about engaging scientists to hoax UFO events and photograph them, later come out and prove they were a hoax, but make them look like actual UFO pictures and things that are being reported by the public. Now, this is not a contested document either. So this kind of corruption of academia and then collusion with big mainstream media outlets, which, as you know from the Air Force intelligence officers reporting in the movie and the book Unacknowledged, states very clearly that they used to carry bags of cash. I'm quoting. Richard Doty said point blank, we would carry bags of cash to affect the outcome of a story or to get the cooperation of these editors and national security correspondents at the national media in the United States. So there is no question that the media has been corrupted by these illegal, unacknowledged special access programs, and that the fourth estate is dead. Some years ago in the 1990s, I met with a guy named Bob Schwartz. He was on the board of Time Life magazine. And he said to me, he says, Dr. Greer, we have become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king, that we absolutely have no independence when it comes to something this explosive, and that the fourth estate, the press, is dead on this. And they will only report what the intelligence community tells them to report. And that is what everyone listening needs to know, is what's happening in real time in front of our very eyes. So you don't have to go back 60 years to the 50s or 50 years to the 60s. This is happening in front of our very eyes today. So that's why I wanted to be on your show, to give you this big picture of what's actually going on. Now, I also have a document that's called, it's in our article on our website called Media Play from the CIA. And I'll hold this up. This is an official document from 1991. I hope you can see it. And they have some things blackened out on it, like the spooks always do. But one of the interesting things it says, we have relationships with reporters from every, underline their emphasis, major wire service newspapers, news weeklies, and television networks in the nation. This is the United States from the CIA. This has helped us to turn intelligence failure stories into success stories, and has contributed. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected what they wanted the public to know. So this is what's more interesting and apropos to today, is there's also somewhere in here there's one that has the same thing it says about academia. This is under B in the same CIA document I held up. Current program. The agency, meaning the CIA, has a wide range of contacts with academics through recruiting, professional science societies, contractual arrangements, and OTE. We have recently been designated the focal point for all information about CIA's relations with the academic community, and that we are engaged in recruiting scholars in residence, etc. This is very concerning. This paper states point blank, we're corrupting academia. Now, just so you know, it is illegal for the CIA to do anything in the United States. That would be the FBI's domain. And here we have documents talking about the corruption in the media and academia. And in this case, this poor little Atacama Humanoid case, we have a headline news all over the world. Here's the LA Times saying, case closed. This 6-year-old 6-inch creature is in fact a fetus that we aborted. This is unbelievable scientific misconduct.
And in the next portion, please stay with us. We're going to take a very short break. We're going to go much more into the science of the DNA, the intelligence community, and what's happening in the corruption of the media, and a call to action, including in Russia especially. Please listen in, my friends. We look forward to this next half with this packed information. We have only just begun this show. Thank you, Steve. We'll be right back, everyone.
All right.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Carol Rasmussen Show, March 30th, 2018, with Dr. Stephen Greer in this special show that is about the uncovering of the cover-up of Atacama, but much, much more. Some of this is going to be technical in this part, so stick with us because we're going to wrap it around into what people can do. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to get into, and when you look at this Atacama humanoid and you look at the density of the bones, and this is something that's a little medical and technical, but stay with me. Everyone's heard of osteoporosis, right? When your bones become thinner, don't have as much calcium in them as they need to have, and you take supplements. When you have a womb, fetus in the womb, there's no gravity. It's like it's in a one of those floating chambers. The fetus is just floating in fluid. It's called amniotic fluid. And there's not a lot of calcium or bone density. And when the baby is born, having delivered many babies and taken care of trauma in babies that have been in terrible accidents, their bones are almost like Gumby bear. They're like Gumbies. They're flexible because it's mostly cartilaginous material, as opposed to hard bones that crack and break. Does this make sense? Sure. The reason for that is that they haven't been up walking around, bang, 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 moving, it's a developmental phenomenon. So one of the things that Dr. Lachman observed, and the radiologists in Spain, in Barcelona, who were excellent, observed, as soon as the images, just X-ray images came off, we did those before the CAT scan, they said, oh my God, what the hell is this? I remember them gasping because the bone density was that of a normal child. It wasn't of a fetus. And the size, 6 inches, they were assuming this was a fetus. And when they looked at the bone density, they said, well, there is absolutely no way this is a fetus that was aborted or a miscarry. This absolutely, it was a organism that was up moving around, because the other thing is that there are cells called osteoblasts that this is why people, as they get older, if they walk around more, they have stronger bones, because osteoblasts are stimulated to lay down more calcium by walking and moving and working out. That's why it's important for people, those of us getting older, to stay active. Now, what people don't understand is that a fetus, the X-rays, if you go to look at fetal X-rays, and you can do this on your own, Google it, you will see that the bone density of those versus this Atacama humanoid are vastly different. Any radiologist, medical doctor looking at those, even a radiology tech, will go, this is not the X-ray of a deformed fetus, full stop. So when we knew that it wasn't a fetus that was rejected by the time we got the X-rays out of the machine in 2012 in Barcelona. And Gary knew it, and Dr. Lachman, who was the world's expert on this. Let me explain. Dr. Lachman at Stanford literally wrote the textbook on skeletal abnormalities in children. Literally wrote the textbook. Renowned globally. He said that it was a 6 to 8 year old child, from not only the bone density, but also the epiphyseal plates, where the bone, when your bones are growing, there's still plates that are open so it can get bigger and bigger because you're still growing. Now, and in his comments, which we will post, he states that, well, there are some rare genetic conditions called progeria, where your bones age faster. So maybe that's not the real age. But he says, I seriously doubt it. He says point blank, in this particular specimen, he doubts that.
Aren't they projecting that this was 6 to 8 years old, though, at 6 inches?
Yes, yeah. Yes. This is in his report, word for word. I am quoting from the report I held up a moment ago, that it was a 6-inch specimen that was 6 to 8 years of age by both bone density. Now, the fact that they're saying this was an aborted or miscarried fetus that spontaneously, like when a woman has a miscarriage, is laughable. The medical evidence and the world's expert on this, and any radiology worth their grain of salt would say this is ridiculous. It's junk science. So now we get to the question of how do you go from that to a major medical journal like Genome Research, putting in this kind of misinformation to the public. And one of the things that was pointed out to me in my telephone conversation with this world-renowned geneticist is that he said that he said, I want to review the peer review statements. Now, often when you do peer review in a journal, the identities of who reviewed it are kept secret because they don't want to be attacked for having, not accepted your paper. But the statements they make are generally made available so that you can see what people said about it. The senior editor at Genome Research refused to give this renowned geneticist the comments and the review itself, how it was peer reviewed. What are they keeping secret? He knew that there was something very fishy there because apparently it must have been a junior editor who slipped this into this prestigious journal, and now they're running scared at Genome Research magazine. He also says that someone walking off the street into Stanford maybe could have made these mistakes on the sequencing and the fact that this old DNA is damaged, but anyone would have done the controls and not reached these conclusions. He said that they were obviously cherry-picked, and out of millions of changes in the DNA, they picked about 60 to create this predetermined hypothesis. And he said it would be headline news if there was one new genetic syndrome found in a living specimen. That they are claiming that there are 7 of them is laughable and implausible. I'm quoting. The data does not support the conclusions of that paper at all. So I think that this gets into the question of there's been a breakdown in the peer review process. There's been a breakdown in oversight at Stanford. There's been a breakdown in the people at publishing this, but also the science writers. If you're a science writer for the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, you should have asked people, is it plausible that this unusual looking creature that had all this other evidence from Dr. Lockman, from the radiologist, the CAT scans, is actually a fetus that was miscarried? They would, if that data were put in front of any competent doctor, medical doctor, they would have said, no, this is ridiculous. And if anyone who would have gone through, now granted, it took 4 days for this world-renowned geneticist to go through the data files to see where the errors were made and where the cherry picking happened. And this caused him to conclude that what they did is that they had a foregone conclusion, which we know they did, because Dr. Nolan made statements to the public in 2012, or 2013, when the movie Sirius was coming out. It's a deformed fetus. I mean, it's a deformed human. It's human. End of discussion. And that was reported in Science magazine and everything.
Stephen, I know, I have my viewpoint, many of our listeners do, why all of this is so hidden, why there's an aggressive discrediting campaign against people who are trying to be truth tellers and reveal what's going on like you've done in the ultimate ways. Why would you say this is happening, and can we even undo it?
Well, for the mainstream public, I don't think there's any undoing. I mean, we are irreparably damaged here because the scientific journals and the mainstream media have colluded on what is, I think, one of the largest scientific misinformation campaigns in modern history. I am not exaggerating to say when you have something that could potentially be, and we don't know, I want to say there's no proof yet that this is of an extraterrestrial origin, but even if there's a 1% chance it is, to have the DNA sequencing be altered, to have known science thrown out, such as the fact that something laying out in the desert is going to have changes in the DNA sequence that are not naturally occurring mutations on the bones that cause the bones to look like this or the creature to look like this, but are the result of just normal degradation and decay. This is settled science. This is, how do you make these wild, spurious conclusions, which are published in a mainstream journal and then covered globally, and it's case closed. The case is closed.
It's the same with the space weapons issue. I mean, people are still, you mentioned weapons of mass destruction. People are still believing that they really were there, or
Yes.
that the Russians colluded, and people are believing what's in the media.
Yes.
And when I hear you, I start to get some hope, but then I wonder.
Well, here's what I think. I think that there's hope only because a large majority of the population doesn't trust the media. A large percentage of the population has begun to question these authority figures. Now, unfortunately, we used to have the citadels of truth were our prestigious scientific institutions. And what I'm worried about with this, and this is why I'm asking people to contact Stanford University and Genome Research in Cold Spring Harbor, Cold Spring Harbor is the facility and institution that Watson and Crick founded where they discovered the DNA molecule, and expressed their deep concern over the possibility that the peer review process broke down, that this then made it into the global media, and that the conclusions that are in the paper, there's a scientist in the LA Times who openly questions the conclusions. He says, this is Dr. Matthew Warman, an expert on skeletal genetic disorders at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard, cautioned that although the researchers identified known and novel genetic variants, they are far from knowing what role, if any, they played in Atta's many abnormalities. It's possible the genetic variants identified in the new research could be responsible for one or more of these events, but if he were advising Atta's bereaved parents or immediate relatives on her genetic condition and told them about their risk, I would be very cautious to use any of the data presented in this paper to draw any conclusions. Now, this is one of the renowned, this is in the LA Times. Those of you, if you can read, for God's sakes, read this. Here's my point. I'm trying to rest what we're doing on truth telling and facts. Fact. The world's expert in skeletal abnormality said it's 6 to 8 years old. Fact. The radiologists have said that it could not be a fetus because of the density of the bone material. Fact. Dr. Nolan himself thought it was something extraordinary until 2 unconfirmed reports of federal agents approached him, and he changed his tune 180 degrees. Fact, there were no controls done for this study, which this world-renowned geneticist has said would have rendered it thrown back. If you were just doing your PhD and didn't even have a chair, the Harris chair at Stanford, the paper would have rejected with a 0 grade, he said, because there were no controls done on the study, and that the conclusions were based on cherry picking sequencing that is almost certainly the result of oxidation and damage to the genetic material. And then on top of it, to say there were that many major genetic syndromes in one conception, one fetus, it would, he said, that amount of genetic damage would have resulted in its inability to even divide once as an embryo. In other words, to go from a single cell zygote into an embryo. It couldn't have even divided, never mind been miscarried or born. So none of this adds up. And so the only conclusion you can reach is, and he stated this to me, it's the level of incompetence of the scientific data is so great that you have to conclude one of 2 things. Either a big trick is being played or there is massive scientific incompetence. Either way, this is a major, major story. We need to get to the bottom line. I am calling, as the head of the global disclosure movement and a medical doctor myself and a scientist, I am calling for a major federal and state investigation of Stanford University, UCSF, Cold Spring Harbor, and Genome Research Magazine and their peer review process. And I am asking all other scientists who have the ability to review this paper objectively and the data objectively, and to review the paper that was published in 2006 that is settled science about how much DNA degrades and falls apart when it's in the environment, to get involved with this, because I do not have a PhD in genetics. And the way this is going to rest right now, to answer your question, is that my opinion is not going to be reported. I had the Washington Post and National Geographic magazine both interview me about this report, and I explained all these problems to them. Not a single word of what I said appeared in the media, not one word, except on your show. Thank you, Carol. You are the only person that has allowed me to explain what our objections are to what could be one of the biggest scientific mishaps in history. Because we're not dealing with, oh, well, you know, they miscued something on an unknown primate. This could be a huge story that we were hoping could have broken wide open the possibility that we're not alone in the universe and there are other species of human-like creatures. And the fact that there is this Russian, and we need help from Russians to get this specimen that was a big one. It was like this large. It was a full grown. It was not. It was bigger than you would had in even a newborn baby, and yet the state examiner in Russia debunked it and said, "Oh, it was an aborted fetus girl." Again, interesting. They're all aborted fetus girls. What is this? I mean, the thing that was said in '96 and what was said in 2018 are the same cover story. It makes no sense. But I think the idea for it being an aborted fetus girl came from somebody who knew how the trick was played by these black projects in Russia. Because remember, there are unacknowledged special access projects in the US and Russia that are hand in glove, that work together. It's global. And there are scientists in Russia that are victims. There are politicians who are victims, just like there are in the United States. And this gets into the whole question of we've got to have disclosure and a full investigation of this corruption, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. This is happening all over the world. And one of the things that I want to share is an email I got from one of the most senior CIA people in the history of the UFO subject. I do not want to share his name because he's still actively involved behind the scenes assisting us. This is one of the reasons I'm still alive. I won't go into that any more than that. This is one of the reasons I have not been successfully assassinated. And he wrote to me about this group on December 31st, this To the Stars Academy group. And his first email was very sweet because he said, "I hope you have not been negatively impacted by TTSA. I anticipate it will dissipate soon." That was on December 30th of 2017. And then he said, when I wrote back, "No, I'm doing fine. I was expecting this. This is why I did the movie Unacknowledged. And the reason I did the book Unacknowledged was because we wanted to have this information in the public before they started running their scams, because I knew it was coming. Because what they were doing is that they were going to start doing a fake disclosure that portrayed the aliens as a threat that would then create the foundation for war in space and World War III, which in 1955, if you read Douglas MacArthur's speech, he said World War III will be interplanetary, that we need to unite the nations of the world. Ronald Reagan said we can unite the world around an alien threat. This has been worked on for 70 years. They have had a 60 to 70 year plan, long-term plan, to play the fake alien threat card. And we're seeing it before our very eyes. You and I've talked about this for 2 decades. but this literally, we're watching this play out before our very eyes. So here is this email that I get the next day. He says, I'm glad to hear all is fine, Steve. I have watched that rat pack, referring to these people that I named on the TTSA group. I have watched that rat pack run scams against the U.S. government, loony billionaires, referring to Bigelow, and now the average citizens. Keep up the good work. I've been studying this subject for over 35 years. This is one of the most senior people in the CIA on the committee dealing with UFOs and ETs. Literally, this man, whose name I will not disclose at this point while I'm still alive, was the man who, after I briefed the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton, was asked to go into the Oval Office to clean up the mess when it was found that this subject was real and that the president and the CIA director at that time was being lied to about it. So this is the man who literally has an all-access pass.
Thank heavens for people like this, because even experts that we know, ministers of defense in other countries that we know and are friends with, have been sucked into this evil alien supposed scenario that's just not true, or we wouldn't be here, duh. So thank you for getting this information out into the people who are making contact with you, and I hope more and more will, because as we're hearing, they're safe. Their names are not going to be brought out so that the people can be protected who are coming forward, unless they want their names to come out.
Now, one of the other interesting things about this is that if we can get more scientists to go on the record, you were mentioning some that are contacting you from Bolivia, and study the details of the scientific report, it's going to be a house of cards. Because I think the man that I have been getting all this great information from, who is very famous, doesn't want to be associated with a scientific scandal like this. But we need people who will be associated with it, because it's hard to take on Genome Research Magazine, which is the premier peer-reviewed magazine in the world. It's hard to take on Stanford University. It's hard to take on the federal government. But this is what I have been doing for, as you know, 28 years. It's a very lonely place. I need help. I'm making a call for other scientists to come and please help us with this process. And I think that one of the things that we find is that when you look at the data that was put forward by Dr. Nolan's team and then passed through to this ridiculous journal article, which should have been returned from the peer reviewers with a 0 grade, you find that there is, we have to find out, and I want to be careful. I'm not going to say that there was deliberate fraud here, but there was certainly many errors. There was errors in the analysis. There was lack of controls done. One of the controls he talked about doing would have been, before you did any of the other sequencing of the DNA, is to do a very simple direct test of how many errors there are in the base pairs of the genetics. Have you? If you look at the molecule, he says there are very inexpensive electrophoresis and gel studies that can be done that any competent lab would have done. Instead, what they did, they used a computer program that does it indirectly, that was able, that you can then fudge the numbers to show that there's less damage. He's saying this would be an easy thing to do, but now all this genetic material went to Stanford. And how are we going to fix this? How am I going to fix this problem? So we have to have people who are going to go in and say, look, the conclusions that are reached and the methodology used is not correct. Now, there needs to then be, I think, a criminal investigation. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. But I think there needs to be a criminal investigation into the peer review process of Cold Spring Harbor's Genome Research Magazine, Stanford University, and UCSF. And the reason I do is that this preeminent scientist has said, There is simply no way that any competent scientist would make these kinds of errors. And there's no way that a journal should have let this get published. And then because of the prestige, the prestigious nature of the journal and the prestigious nature of Stanford, it got worldwide news, which has now submarined, completely torpedoed what we're trying to do with the Disclosure Project. This is something we also need to assemble a legal team. So if there are any people out there who are investigators, who are competent litigators, and any federal authorities, FBI, and National Institutes of Health investigators, because much of the funding that goes to Cold Spring Harbor and Stanford is from NIH. Our tax money is paying for this. And I think the public should be outraged in America that this report made its way into this prestigious journal and institution that is being funded by grants from me and you, taxpayers. And also Stanford, much of that research that's done at these universities is coming from the US taxpayers, from the US government, much of it, most of it. And to have something like this happen where one of the most prestigious scientists in the world in the DNA area with a PhD from Caltech stated to me, now I can't make this conclusion, this is his statements, that this is a trick. This is pulling a rabbit out of a black hat. There is no foundation for his conclusions at all. But this scientist from Harvard who was saying that you can't reach these conclusions. Because anyone who does ancient DNA research, let me just back this up. Let's say that you're a specialist in archaeology. You might be able to determine whether something's male or female, maybe from the old degraded DNA. You would never claim you have 7 new genetic syndromes, never before seen in combination in the world, that would result in this phenotype. Phenotype meaning the physical expressed form of the genetic code. No one, nobody in archaeology genetics, no one in ancient genetics, no one with competent scientific credentials. And trust me, the people who were doing this at Stanford, Dr. Nolan and his colleagues, are very competent. So how can you can't say, well, there's complete incompetence because the people are competent. There has to be an element of something very dark going on here, possibly.
So you're saying that ancient DNA cannot be used to extrapolate genetic conclusions. But
to a living organism, to an organism that was a living organism. It cannot be done. That's what that paper in 2006 stated. And that you might be able to speculate, but you couldn't reach hard conclusions. You might be able to say maybe this alteration is a mutation that occurred naturally, but it might have been just because the DNA decayed, was falling apart, sitting out in the desert for over 100 years. The point I'm making is that no competent scientist would have reached those conclusions. Who has a passing, superficial knowledge of ancient DNA that's been degraded. But at the same time, very interestingly, a very inexpensive test that should have been done at the first part of the research, which would have been the control, would have uncovered how much of that DNA they were sequencing had damage in it. Oddly, that wasn't published. And yet, I think it might have been done initially because the first emails I got from Dr. Nolan were that it was only 91% matching to humans. Now he's claiming it's 98%, but that's through this indirect measurement, not a direct measurement. So has there been manipulation of the methodology and the statistics and the bioinformatics? All of this is suspect. It's all very suspect, and there needs to be a full investigation by people who have competency in these areas, which frankly, I am a clinical medical doctor. Now, what I do have competency on is to say that this is 6 to 8 years old. Now, he's claiming that it was in the womb as a fetus and that this progeria gene caused it to age as if it looked 6 to 8 years of age while it was still a fetus. Well, this is nonsensical because the bone density would not have been there at that level, and that this combination of progeria, this advanced bone aging, with all these other abnormalities, including only 10 ribs, and that you see in trisomies, a genetic cluster called trisomies, all these things in one organism, in one creature, it just is, it's frankly laughable. It doesn't pass the laugh test. Look at the shape and the size of the skull with 4 bones instead of 6. What is that? So suddenly he's claiming, well, there could have been nitrates in the environment where these mines were, where the mother was living, that caused all these magical bone genetic defects to happen all at once in one organism. Well, then how did it happen in the organism in Russia that has 4 bones and looks very similar, like an adult version of this? The clinical case, even the genetic sequencing, don't add up to the conclusions. So why make those conclusions? Why not just say, we don't know what this is? I am still saying, and I have UFO pictures from this part of the Atacama. I have testimony given to me by people who have been there, who were investigators, like Alex Chianetti. Alex Chianetti gave us that UFO photograph that I'll show again from the Atacama. And what's interesting is that Alex Chianetti, my assistant's going to get me this photograph again, said that he has interviewed people directly who have seen these little beings walking around out in this remote area of the Atacama. What's this? So you have to put the whole case together, is what I'm saying. You can't just cherry pick, oh, there's some DNA strands here. We're going to pull those out and make them fit into a predetermined conclusion, not do the test that should be done to see how much of that is mutation versus damage, and then put this in a major peer-reviewed journal and give interviews to the New York Times and everywhere else saying, ha, 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 this little alien mummy is in reality a deformed child. Now there's a legal case going in Chile with the government furious that a human child was taken out of the country without the correct permits. And this was in the New York Times yesterday. Now, of course, neither I nor Dr. Nolan had any part of that. There was a treasure hunter who found the little specimen, sold it to this man in Spain, Ramon, who then let us take a sample. So we didn't take it out of the country. We have no participation in that scandal. But that's another scandal that's brewing.
Are there other countries involved in this too?
No. It came from Chile and was purchased by this man in Spain and was taken to Spain, where it's remained. Now I believe it's in the Barcelona Museum. But it's created a huge governmental kerfuffle in Chile, and the scientific community there is furious that this specimen was taken out of the country. I think they're going to be more furious, however, when they realize that it was taken out, but the science being done on it appears to be junk science. Because what a shame, you have this once in a lifetime opportunity to do, or once in 100 years opportunity to do this kind of scientific research, which ends up being somehow twisted into these wild conclusions that there is an alien baby syndrome that's a human, where there are 7 different bone defects that happen all at once, magically. And it's all based on a wrong interpretation of the DNA data. This has been proven by this other scientist who went for 4 days through the database that was with this paper. So I think we have to get down to the bottom of this. And I think that I am calling for the public to contact they can contact me at this info@seriousdisclosure.com. And if there are other scientists, and the misconduct can be reported at there is a Office of General Counsel violations of conduct and can go to a helpline. It's 650-721-2667. And it's compliance@stanford.edu. So I will put this up just so people could get a screenshot of it.
Now, for those of you watching the YouTube link, you're seeing this on video. Right now, most of us are listening live on the radio. So either way, the links will be at the bottom of the YouTube videos, okay, and also on AmericanFreedomRadio.com in the archives.
Yeah, and I think that what we are eventually going to do is collect all the comments from these scientists and the report from the 2005 study saying you cannot conclude what he did based on ancient old DNA that's been in an uncontrolled environment out in the desert. And we'll post it on our website and we will put it out there. We're still collecting all of this, but I want to collect more. The reason I went on your show is that I want to get more evidence from the Atacama, from researchers. I'm waiting to get some firsthand interviews with people who have seen more of these little creatures walking around. We want more information on the Russia case. Apparently a Japanese news crew went over there before the FSB confiscated the Russian being, and they got a lot of material and evidence, and we want a full investigation in Russia to find where this body went. Where did this small, unusual looking body went? Where is it now? Has it been incinerated? Is it in a lab? Is it in an underground base? Did it get taken out of the country and brought to the United States, where it's in a black project? We need to know where this is. So there's a great deal of research. What I'm saying is the case on this is not closed. It's just opening. But the New York Times, everything that's fit the print, of course, what a joke, has said case is closed and that it's a deformed human girl. Now, I don't know what it is. I want to go back to the fact that in the film series, at the press conference after, and to this very moment on this date in 2018, I am saying, I don't know what it is. I honestly don't. And an honest researcher will say that because I don't have a database of ET DNA to match it with. You see what I'm saying? I know the CIA does. In fact, in this email I got from this senior CIA official, he was talking that he's studying something that doesn't match to their, quote, alien DNA database. They have that. That's explosive, what he admitted in that email. That's another story. But that it isn't a human, but it also doesn't appear to be, quote, an alien. And of course, I'll have to have a conversation with him. It's probably a PLF, a program life form, the fake ones that they use to abduct people with. He's probably one of those, probably got captured. Remember, 99% of everything you will ever read and see on this subject is hoaxed. 99%. That includes all the abduction data, the mutilation data, everything that is portraying these aliens as a threat to us, as harming us. It's all a lie. It's all been hoaxed. And we've known this for 20 years, 25 years. And everyone in the intelligence community at a senior level know that. Now, they won't say it to the public. There are those like Elizondo, who is head of the Threat Assessment Office at the Pentagon, to spin it in the direction of an alien threat, like Wernher von Braun told you they would. But we're seeing now what we're in front of our very eyes, Carol. We are seeing played out before us what Wernher von Braun predicted in the 70s.
Well, for sure. In fact, you see boxes all around me. My husband and I have now moved to another location so I can start working more on this, focused with it, especially with my Russian colleagues who know what you're saying. They talk about the disinformation, the different perspectives, belief systems, interpretations. And it's why I kind of stopped working with this community that is focused on selling books and tapes and conferences and poster people. But it isn't changing anything. I'm interested in working with people who want to cause a change. If it's possible, we've got to come together and finally tell the truth. we have
Yes.
nothing to lose. If you listen to Dr. Guy McPherson, who supports your work, of course, he's an expert who's been on the show several times. He says that because we're not waking up to the truth and facing it, it's very possible that the whole human species will not be here within 10 years or less. It could happen in a blink of an eye. And if you look at what's going on the planet, I could list the different things, but won't take
Sure.
the time. Or the bigwobble.org, you read about it and see pictures. You see we're in really dire, grave conditions
Yes,
all
we
over
are.
the world. So
We
what
are.
you're doing is so vitally important. And would you give all of your contact information, the Netflix information about the documentary, how people can reach you? Let's get that right in to make sure we don't miss this opportunity for people to
Sure.
contact you, and what you would like for people to do.
Well, we want people to contact us if they have more information and are whistleblowers on the possibility of corruption in this case, whether it's at Stanford or UCSF or at Cold Spring Harbor and Genome Research Magazine. We need whistleblowers to come forward. We need people to come forward who are scientists who further review the data and who are experts in ancient DNA to make comments on the legitimacy of these conclusions that were reached. We need the public to contact all of you listening, that office at Stanford, and also the editor of Genome Research Magazine, Dr. Sussman, and to get to express your dismay at how this has been handled. And eventually we're going to ask that everyone, we're going to put a clipping file together of all the media that has carried this outrageous story, to ask them to investigate the truth and to retract these statements that they have made. Because the media, as you know, has colluded with the intelligence community on this. There's no chance that the media just discovered this obscure journal. How many media people know about genome research? How many people know? Suddenly it goes from appearing in that to being worldwide news overnight, when all the work we have done putting together the hard evidence of the proof of ET and UFO research has never been covered by them. Never. What's going on here? That's the proof of the corruption of the media. So we feel there should be people who are very good investigative reporters who are independent of the mainstream media to drill down on where are the points of corruption. As Special Agent Richard Doty said, we carry bags of cash to these editors. We want to find out who are the people on the inside of the New York Times and CNN and BBC that are corrupt and who have been corrupting this story. And then as soon as Elizondo and this disinformation rat pack want to have this one gun camera footage case on December 16th known, it's worldwide news, whereas the #1 documentary in the world unacknowledged, that's on Netflix and iTunes and everywhere, on the subject has never been mentioned in any of the mainstream media. Why? Because in the documentary, we have you talking about this hoaxed alien threat. We have an expose of the corruption of the media. We have an expose of the corruption of the academic community, because we mentioned the Condon report, and of course this is before all this. This is another whole documentary that we need to create here. We need help with that, by the way. But I think that the public needs to understand that there's something very fishy going on, and that the fact that all of this has become headline news based on a poorly done study that has reached outrageously wild, implausible conclusions by any common sense analysis, never mind if you're a PhD in genetics. But the people with PhDs are looking at that and going, this is utter junk, complete junk. So how does that make its way onto the front page of the New York Times? How does that make its way into Cold Spring Harbor's flagship Genome Research Journal, where Watson and Crick discovered the DNA molecule? This is an outrageous series of events. This is global news. Now, whether it will ever be covered honestly, I don't know. I've been doing this for 28 years and I've never seen the media media treat this subject honestly yet because they're in the back pocket of the intelligence community. That
And
paper
certainly not in this country and allies. When I was in Russia, traveled internationally, it does go out, but not here.
Yeah, well, maybe the news media in Russia or Russia Today or Pravda or the Chinese news agency will report this. But it's something that needs to get reported globally. We're on this planet together, 7.7 billion people. We have very limited time to fix this problem. And this question of, are we alone in the universe? How are they getting here? What are the technologies they're using to get here? And could that save the world's environment and eliminate poverty and the collapse of the ecosystem? Yes. So that's why I'm doing this. I left my medical career to do this, because in the heart of this issue and the disclosure, factual, truthful disclosure of this issue, is the ability for the human race to go forward, not only in space peacefully, but to live on this planet without destroying it. Because the technologies that they've kept from us, just like the information they've kept from us, would give us free and clean energy, no pollution, soundless travel, anti-gravity. We would never need roads again. We would never need any pollution. Poverty on this planet would be eliminated in 1 generation. There would be no poverty on this planet in 1 generation. All of that is possible still, Carol, but it isn't going to happen until we as a people come together and make it so. And I think that that's one of the real calls to action. Everyone from Vladimir Putin to the president of China to Theresa May in the UK, many of these people, they all need to understand what's at stake here. And the reason that we have had this case submarined is that they're trying to move everything you and I are doing aside so that they have a clear playing field for the alien threat announcement. Mm-hmm. This is what I wanted to get to at the end of your program. What is the point of all this? Now, I don't think Dr. Nolan understands this because this is past his pay grade. In the intelligence community, they would know. But there is a methodology being followed here. Let's discredit anything related to the actual truth and people doing truth telling like we are on this. And let's magnify the people who are running scams, as the CIA guy says, about the TTSA group and the counterintelligence and CIA people who are fronting for this cabal, who are trying to prepare the world for the alien threat so that we can spend trillions of dollars on a fake threat that doesn't exist and put weapons all over space, which has just been announced. This is an existential crisis. People think this is sort of some gadfly weird little thing on the side about this life form, this Atacama humanoid and what you're doing. No, this is the future of the human race that's at stake here. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it.
And the pieces are being put together to support everything you're saying. Even Elon Musk, whose top people told me he will not support the words peace in space, not even to continue the cooperation, which is all there is in outer space right now, let alone mention the signing of the treaty to ban all space-based weapons, which would open up all the truth and disclose all and let the portals of information come in. No. So people have a hard time discerning, though, for who to listen to. And what you've done is put together a constellation, not of Elon Musk's kind of satellites to cover the world, which has just been announced he's getting ready to do, but you've put together a constellation of people and information that is amazing.
Right. And this is what we have. I mean, if you go to our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com, there are links to dozens of military and intelligence and corporate whistleblowers who are giving you real information. There are all the images of this, the CAT scans, the Dr. Lockman's report from Stanford, all of that is there. We're being as transparent as we can possibly be. And we're always trying to say, we're not alone in the universe. We have been visited. The technologies have been developed from studying this that could save the world's environment and create justice and peace here and in space. But it has to happen in a way where there now has to be a groundswell. People are going to have to get first outraged that they've been left out of the loop, but then take constructive action. And we need more whistleblowers to come forward, and we need more people in high places in Russia and other countries, because I'm very patriotic. My mother's family were some of the original prisoner of war with the British. in founding the United States. But I have to say, I think the United States has become a lost cause. The corruption here is so bad. The corruption of the media, the collusion with academia and the media and the intelligence community is so entrenched that we need help from Russia and China and Brazil and Chile and Bolivia and wherever, France. We need countries to understand, don't wait for the United States. And this is one of my messages to Vladimir Putin and to China. Do not wait for the United States. The United States, at this point, has lost its ability to lead on this matter. And in fact, it is the crown jewel and the global secrecy on this. It is the biggest economy. It has the most technology. It's where most of the assets are that are based on these advanced weapon systems that they've been studying from these ET craft. The United States is not going to give up that position. The rest of the world needs to come together with a space peace declaration and treaty. They need to disclose what they have in their archives. They need to come together with us to develop the technologies and get them out to save the planet's environment. And they need to just do this irregardless of what the United States is going to do. Because I have personally been involved with this from the end of the George H.W. Bush period, the briefing of President Clinton, when I was working with Lawrence Rockefeller and the CIA director for Clinton, with the George W. Bush period, where Andy Card, his chief of staff, walked out the day we did the Disclosure Project event and took that entire 500-page briefing document and took it back into the White House for Bush to read. That happened, by the way.
Wow.
I don't know if you know that. And then the Obama administration with Podesta, where we put together this briefing for him. And now we have Trump. And as soon as he got nominated, I put together a briefing for Trump. There's nothing coming out of the United States that is good, unfortunately, from the official point of view.
This is historic and biblical. It goes way back. So now
Yes.
I love your idea of starting now, bringing the world together and
Yes.
doing the things that you're calling for.
And the Americans will come along. I mean, most people in America are not part of some evil cabal. Most people just want to live their life. They want to have peace. They want to have prosperity, and they want to be able to have their families be safe and secure. But the most dangerous thing going on, most Americans don't know it. They're not going to find out from the New York Times that we're, trying to, as agents provocateurs, we're trying to provoke an attack from these interstellar civilizations and have been doing so for decades. We have evidence after evidence after evidence of our training our weapon systems on them and shooting their craft down. And yet they haven't retaliated. Where have they retaliated? No place. It shows the enlightened restraint of these other civilizations because they've gone beyond where we are. They have reached the level one that Michikaku talks about in terms of a level one civilization that's peaceful and isn't cannibalizing its environment to live. They've gone into these higher levels of social consciousness and technologies, and they're waiting for us to catch up. But the problem is most of humanity, I think, is ready for this leap forward. But there are these sociopaths, the Armageddonites, the people who want to have a World War III end of life on Earth so that their Messiah will return or their Christ will return, these nut jobs who frankly are running these covert programs. They're lunatics. I've met with them. I mean, when I was meeting with one of the members of the committee, this majority intelligence committee, he said to me point blank, we need to have a global environmental catastrophe in World War III so that Christ will return. I'm not kidding you. This is how crazy these people are. So these are the people who have the most power and money in the world. They're absolute lunatics. I'm just going to say it right there, point blank.
And we have the biggest hearts in the world. And there are people in the complex. I've worked in positions in the revolving door complex. Many, many people will agree with you. Now, if we can support getting a treaty signed, support getting this information out, this show has been one more sample that you have produced. Thank you, Stephen Greer, Dr. Greer, for all the work that you've been doing as a physician for your 9 grandchildren and for the children of the world. hundreds of millions of them who are starving right this minute and suffering with disease, poverty.
Right.
We can change it thanks to your kind of vision.
Well, please contact us at seriousdisclosure.com. People who want to see what's happened with Unacknowledged, which has in the last year been the #1 documentary in the world. I think the release of all this disinformation by the Rat Pack, that this CIA guy calls these guys, has happened because they know that there are 100,000 people a day seeing the documentary Unacknowledged. 100,000 people. And that's why, at our online store, if you want to get this book, you can get it half off, or you can get it for free if you get the DVD of the Unacknowledged movie. So we're doing this because we want to move this out. You can then do showings of it in your community centers. Just get the word out. This is all viral. We're not going to get help from the New York Times, but we, the people, can do it. I have faith in the people. I've sort of lost faith in the U.S. government. Now, I've dealt in a limited way with other governments, and I have found that they have been similarly corrupted on a deep level of their sort of deep national security issues. But maybe there will be people in Russia or France or Chile or Bolivia or other places that will come forward. I am also hoping people come forward who are scientists who will help review this paper like this geneticist has over the last 4 days. He has spent 4 long days going through the data and has concluded it is complete junk, absolutely junk. And I think that the public needs to file a complaint with Stanford and with Cold Spring Harbor. But if there are scientists out there who are sincere truth tellers, who are willing to be named in this, they need to contact me, because this is the only way. As elders, as I get older, I feel that people like you and I have to be truth tellers and expose the frauds and expose the corruption and tell the truth. We don't have many days left on this planet, so let's do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Make contact with Dr. Greer. Let's keep the truth flowing. We can have peace on this planet in our lifetime like there is in space. And we can go for it with this uncovering of the cover-ups and the vision. Give it to the children, spread the word around the world so that we can all live in peace.
Yes.
No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.